Hey everybody, and welcome back to Video Game Esoterica. On today's episode, we're taking a look at the 3DO M2's graphical capability compared to some of the systems of the time. On the right, you have Fighter's Destiny for the Nintendo 64. Chose this game compared to Battle Trist as it kind of reminded me of the same sort of character design and overall color scheme. You can definitely see on the right the characters in Fighter's Destiny have a much reduced polygon count for the characters themselves, where on the left in Battle Trist, there's definitely a higher polygon count and those characters look much more lifelike. Both backgrounds are 2D sprites versus polygonal 3D backgrounds, so that is something they have in common, but even if you look at the texture on the floor between Battle Trist and Fighter's Destiny, you can see how much better the M2 was at kind of rendering those textures. Now on the right, we have Virtua Fighter 3 Team Battle on the Dreamcast, and you can see the huge generational leap between the two platforms. Virtua Fighter has fully polygonal 3D backgrounds, although as far as the character models are concerned, they're closer than you would expect. Obviously M2 was closer to a Dreamcast spec than it was a Nintendo 64 or PlayStation 1, but you can definitely see that they are more similar than they are different. Both are running at 60 frames a second, although there's obviously a lot more polygons being thrown around in the Dreamcast version. Overall, Virtua Fighter is a much better game than Battle Trist. Better gameplay, better graphics, overall, definitely prefer that one, but as a comparison tool, you can see where the M2 slotted between. Now we're looking at Toei Polystars on the left and R-Type Delta on the right. I chose two polygonal 3D shooters for both systems. I mean, honestly, Polystars is not really pushing the M2 platform much at all. You're seeing some slowdown on the left, where on the right, with R-Type Delta, it is running at a locked 60 frames a second. But as far as the 3D backgrounds are concerned and the overall feel of the games, obviously one's a vertical shooter and one's a horizontal shooter, but graphically they're very similar. Obviously this shows that the PlayStation 1, Saturn, and Nintendo 64 definitely could have had a Polystars on them as a port when the home console never actually came to be. I don't know why Konami never brought these home, but you could definitely have run Polystars on other platforms that were technically weaker than the M2 spec. R-Type Delta is a great game, pretty rare these days. Doesn't really remind me that much of Polystars. Obviously, Polystars is a cute-em-up, colorful 3D shooter with these weird-looking polygon guys, where R-Type Delta definitely has a more darker invasion theme to it. But as far as the overall look is concerned, I kind of thought they were the same. So on the left here you have IMSA Racing, and on the right you have Ridge Racer Type 4. They both feel very similar to me. Obviously, you can tell in IMSA Racing, the cars have a much higher polygon count compared to Ridge Racer, although Ridge Racer is definitely running at a higher frame rate. Not a hugely fair comparison since IMSA Racing is a leaked beta that was never fully finished, so optimization-wise, it would have run at a full 60 frames a second. Gameplay-wise, Ridge Racer, definitely more fun. I mean, granted, I can't even control IMSA Racing because the control pad doesn't work very well with the kiosk unit, but even if it worked perfectly, I don't know. Now on the right, we have Ferrari Challenge for the Dreamcast, and you can definitely see the generational leap between the Dreamcast and the M2. While the M2 is closer to the Dreamcast than it is to the PlayStation 1, considering the time frame that this console was supposed to come out, 97, it wasn't powerful enough really to compete with what the Dreamcast had coming. When Panasonic pushed it into 98 with the Dreamcast right around the corner, you can definitely see where that cancellation may have come into effect. They looked at the Dreamcast and realized they might only have graphical superiority for home consoles for maybe 12 to 18 months until they were eclipsed. So M2's timing has always been a little bit bad, unfortunately. But as gameplay comparisons go, both are super fun. You have a definitely feeling of speed more in the Dreamcast games here than you do on the M2, but they're both great. Alright, on the left here we have Evil Knight, released in 1998, compared to House of the Dead, playing on the Sega Saturn. Not a really fair comparison, considering House of the Dead for the Saturn is considered a competent gameplay port, but graphically is known to be quite poor. The pixels on the Saturn, they're huge. You just really can't look at it and not think it's ugly. Obviously, the Model 2 version was much better, but considering you could have played either of these games at home technically had the M2 released, you can see the huge graphical leap the M2 provides. There's definitely some texture distortion on the M2, but as far as polygon counts of characters, frame rate, texture work's concerned, the M2 is leaps and bounds beyond what the Saturn could produce graphically. You look at something like Time Crisis for the PlayStation 1, it's also going to be much lower polygon count and worse textures than Evil Knight. So this is kind of where the platform really does shine. Although what you'll see in the moment when we bring House of the Dead 2 up on the right is that now the M2 version, now Evil Knight looks much worse. You have a huge number of polygons being pushed around on House of the Dead 2. The character models look much better compared to the M2 version on the left. So once again, you kind of see M2 was great in 1996, but as it gets closer to release in late 97, early 98, and you have the Dreamcast right around the corner, you can definitely see that M2 would have struggled against the Dreamcast. You would have had something like Wii versus Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3 sort of, graphical capabilities where they both had great games, but they just weren't on par. Now on the left, you brought up Total Vice. Definitely not as good of graphics compared to Evil Knight. This was released in 1997 versus Evil Knight being released in 1998, but they are still two fun games to look at side by side. Obviously, you can look at all the models, all the hands are just polygons, there's no fingers. You look at the Dreamcast and all the characters have individual, some of them that are close up have individual fingers, but they're closer than they are further apart, and that's what is the curiosity. Had the M2 actually come home, could it have competed against something like the Dreamcast? Could it have been $100 cheaper than Dreamcast at launch and maybe got market saturation based on that? We'll never know because it never came home, but it's definitely interesting to be able to put all these games side by side and talk about what they look like and see just what the M2 was capable of. So there you have it, the graphical capabilities of the M2 compared to other hardware of the time. It's been a lot of fun looking at what the M2 could do, and it's a lot of fun presuming what the M2 could have done had it been out on the market for multiple years. Considering Konami is the only company that really made games for it, it's really hard to say what games would have looked like had they been made by other developers, but that's basically it. Thanks so much for watching, really appreciate it. Please hit the subscribe button down below. We're getting close to the end of Season 1, but we've got some fun stuff coming up for you in Season 2. You can follow us at Instagram at Chicago Game Collector. If you have any questions, just leave them in the comments below and we'll definitely check them out. But I hope you enjoyed the video, and we will be back next week with the finale of the 3DO M2 coverage. So, enjoy this little montage of footage right here. Otherwise, we'll see you next week. Thanks so much for watching, guys.